Using battery. Okay. So hello everybody, good morning and welcome back to the Hindu Hindu series analysis. Because of certain issues, heavy rain and resultant, issues, we could not have this discussion in the last 3 days, that is Monday to Wednesday. So we are, continuing from today, and as you know, the date is 13th of July. So as usual, we will be starting with the first page, and that is the front page of the Hindu, and quickly you will see that what is important from this page. Okay. So center to buy tomatoes from south and west. You know how tomatoes pricing, price is soaring today. For the last few days, and somewhere the tomato prices used to be 30 rupees per kg last month. Today it is selling somewhere at a cost of 200 to 250. Okay. So apart from that, so in order to ease this, price pressure in the market, government is actually, the central government I am talking about, is trying to purchase more of these tomatoes from Karnataka, Maharashtra and Andhra Pradesh and sell them at a discount in areas with high prices. Fine. Apart from that, the another, this news is related to your June inflation, CPI inflation. So June inflation weakens to 4.8% as food prices climb. So of course you see tomato is one of the factors. So top is always there, means tomato, onion, potato. These are seasonal factors, seasonal variations which actually drives the prices upward. Fine. So this is one of the reasons. Apart from that, see, food price inflation increases to 4.5% from less than 3%. So you see, if inflation, somewhere weakens to 4.58%, so of course the major driver is of course the rising food inflation prices, because earlier it was in the range of 3%, even less than 3% by date, but today it has somewhere increased to 4.5%, means plus 1.5%, more than 1.5%. So of course the net effect you will see in rising in your CPI inflation. Fine. So in the previous month, due to rising cost of items, the cereals, pulses and tomatoes, retail inflation below RBI upper threshold. Of course, as we time and again we have discussed that the upper threshold for the this under monetary policy target is plus minus 2, that is 4% plus minus 2%. Means the upper threshold for RBI is 6% and the lower side is 2%. Inflation should be in the range of 2% to 6%, but ideally it should be somewhere around 4%. Okay, it is good for the economy as well because it somewhere attracts private investment. Okay. Apart from that, industry output expands by 5.2%. Not that you can say good, but still better than somewhere compared in comparison to the Apple's output of 4.46%. Fine, so lots of data, need not to remember each and everything, just need to keep in mind the trends, whether increasing or decreasing. Okay. Power generation, you see, because this was basically driven by infrastructure, which grew by 4.2% of course. So overall, infrastructure is one of the sector which is driving this positive or net growth in the industrial output. Okay, apart from that, you see rising rates. India's retail inflation accelerated to 4.81% in June from 4.31% in May. So somewhere in June, you see the upward, this increasing the inflation rate by around 0.5%. Right? From 4.31 to 4.81, exactly 0.5%. Okay, apart from that, of course driven by this, and the factor or the reason behind this is of course the food inflation. The reason is rising prices of cereals, pulses and of course nowadays tomatoes. Okay, so this is the general trend line showing you retail inflation and food inflation. You see from June 2020 to June 2023, in the last 3 years you see that how the trend has been moving towards upward and downward. This is the trend line. So retail inflation you see the blue one, and food inflation is somewhere, so of course catching up. Fine. you see this upward trend and then this falling up further. Fine. So of course seasonal factors apart from the cereals, pulses and tomatoes in rising prices. Fine. Apart from that, our Prime Minister, is on 2-day visit to France, fine, in order to attend the National Day, the France National Day, and this visit is being starting from today, that is 13th July, 13th, 14th, he will be there in France, and therefore the expectations, as I said, that whenever our Prime Minister, or let us say the head of the state or head of the government respectively, visits any country, then we have lots of expectations from this visit, bilateral visit. So of course we are expecting that there will be a big ticket defense deals like we do in PM Paris visit, and of course we may see further more number of Rafales coming to India. Okay, so we'll be keeping tab on this as a new, this whole of the issues of the deals and agreements, further coming up in the next 2 days. Okay, so we'll be discussing this in detail after the final conclusion of Prime Minister's visit. Okay, what else? What else is important? So you see, G7 pledges defense support to Ukraine. Okay, but NATO chief has said that not given any defined this timeline that by what time they will be allowing Ukraine to actually join NATO. Fine. So keep in mind this much of the news related to NATO and inclusion of this Ukraine in the NATO. Okay, so these are the news from Delhi, the local news. Next you see the politics and lots of politics. Okay, so we'll be simply skipping these pages and moving to the next important page and of course the most important article here. Okay, so we'll be discussing this article which is quite this is somewhere you can say the consequences, influence or ramifications of this article or the topic itself, and this is focusing on some South China Sea tension. Okay, so South China Sea, when you talk about South China Sea, remember here you have this China itself, South China Sea tensions, and quid diplomacy could ease South China Sea tensions. So how this South China Sea tensions could be eased, but before that let me brief you about the background of these whole issues. Remember what happened in this South China Sea, especially where the countries you have this Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, somewhere Malaysia, Brunei, etc. Fine, these are even Taiwan Strait, Taiwan, then you have a Spratly Island, then you have Parcel Island, of course important ones. So these are the areas actually, this particularly the South China Sea, which has been claimed by this China itself and it claims that it has historical rights over this South China Sea. And especially there is a term called 9-dash lines. Okay, so now 9-dash lines are nothing but defined areas. If you see on the map, there are 9 dashes basically. Fine, so this demarcates the area basically claimed by China as its having historical rights over these 9-dash lines. Now these 9-dash lines cover majority, this area or the region of your South China Sea. Fine, so this is the issue because China considers it as a historically its own. Fine, but there are countries like, for example, Vietnam, Philippines, especially Philippines, which is having major issue with such claim of China that it has historical rights over these 9-dash lines. So what happened then, and of course anything, if some issues cropping up related to your maritime, fine. So of course this under UN clause we have provision where you can approach the permanent court of arbitration based in Netherlands. Okay, so what happened, this permanent court of arbitration judgment came in favor of this Philippines in the year 2016 and going against China. But since China has already withdrew itself in the 2013 itself from the permanent court of arbitration, so the major issue was that whether China would be accepting this judgment or not. Okay, so we'll be discussing that. So of course China is not going to accept that judgment, But so far, this Philippines claims its rights and even quote this judgment as somewhere evidence, as evidence, of course, in order to further strengthen its claim over South China Sea. Okay. So what is the context? You see, earlier what happened, the foreign ministers of India and Philippines had this bilateral meetings in India itself. So foreign ministers of India and Philippines met at 5th meeting of the Philippines-India Joint Commission on Bilateral Cooperation in Delhi on June 29. We had discussed this when this issue when the foreign secretary of Philippines met our honorable foreign minister. Okay. So building on the shared interest of the two maritime Asian republics and nearly 75 years of diplomatic history, so we have 75 years of long diplomatic history with respect to the Philippines. External Affairs Minister of India, of course, the most popular one, Subramaniam Jaishankar, said, and the Secretary for Foreign Affairs of the Philippines, that is Enrique Manalo, outlined the path for a strengthened bilateral partnership between Manila and Delhi in the 21st century. So you see somewhere we are trying to improve, not just improve, but rather strengthen our bilateral relations. So what basically the issue related to South China Sea, what are all the issues? So the decision to open the Resident Defense Attaché office in Manila. India has actually decided to open a Resident Defense Attaché office in Manila. So what exactly Defense Attaché? Even in one of the previous discussion I have explained this. Remember, whenever, for example, we have this high commissioners and ambassadors in other countries. So this, wherever our embassy is, let us say India's embassy in Manila, the capital of Philippines. So there, a person of high rank, especially in the defense, would be attached, would be posted at our embassy in Manila, and he will be actually, this recommending or suggesting or giving his recommendations with respect to the defense, or the defense cooperation or maritime cooperation to move forward with Manila, and therefore take decisions accordingly with respect to the evolving situations. Okay, so defense attaché is basically a defense personnel of high rank official attached or with the respective embassy of the country. Okay. Boosting cooperation between the coast guards of the two countries. There are certain steps which were taken by India and the Philippines. So acquisition of naval assets by Manila under concessional line of credit. Time and again I have explained line of credit from Delhi, and expansion of training and joint exercises in maritime security and disaster responses. So these are you can say the bigger outlines for the areas of basically cooperation between India and Philippines. Commencing a maritime dialogue are some examples of the evolving strength of this nautical partnership. Okay, so these are the major areas of our bilateral partnership. However, the most notable development was the agreement on regional and multilateral issues, particularly on maritime highways such as the South China Sea, because even that day I told you that somewhere India, supports this Philippines with respect to the judgment of the permanent court of arbitration, which were given in favor of Philippines in 2016. Okay. While India reiterated its consistent position on adhering to international law, including the United Nations Convention on Laws of the Sea, its unambiguous call to respect the 2016 arbitral award on the South China Sea is a departure from India's earlier position. So, of course, when this 2016 arbitral award was pronounced by the Permanent Court of Arbitration, India sided with the Philippines outrightly and said that China should, respect this, whatever Permanent Court of Arbitration has said. So this judgment was more or less in favor of Philippines, and it was against China. Okay, claim of historical rights over South China Sea. From noted to adherence to the 2016 arbitral award is a candid recognition of its legitimacy. Fine. Of course, this lends credence or legitimacy to our partnership with Philippines. Philippines just can treat India as a trusted friend because we have lended our support with respect to this judgment, which is in favor of Philippines. The Philippines has submitted a case of arbitration to the Permanent Court of Arbitration in order to settle disputes with China. Despite China's formal withdrawal from the arbitration on February 19, 2013, the proceedings continued as scheduled under event clause guidelines. So you can think of that when one party is withdrawing itself from this arbitration procedure, then how come the proceeding could further proceed? Fine. But the issue is, there is a clause under event clause itself. There is a annexer which says that the judgment or this proceeding won't be affected even a party in the course of this judgment withdraw or even remain absent. So the absence of the parties or the failure of the party to this Annex 7 stipulates of the event clause, especially additional law C, to present its case shall not be a bar to the proceedings. Okay, so even if a party withdraw itself or remain absent, the proceedings would go, would be going on. Fine. It's not like that this is going to be somewhere. Okay. So the PCA finally released the award of July 12, 2016. I've already told about this. The arbitration took into account the maritime rights, the status of particular marine features, historical rights, and the legitimacy of the particular. So every major area was, were considered by the Permanent Court of Arbitration before giving its final judgment. Okay. Particular Chinese action in the South China Sea that Manila claimed to be illegal, of course. The tribunal's decision is final and binding, remember. In accordance with the event clause Article 96 and Article 11 of the Annex 7, the PCA denied China's assertion that it had historical rights in the South China Sea, and the unanimous decision was unexpectedly in the Philippines' favor. That's what I have already told you. It further states that any priority rights to resources situated inside the land-dash line were unfounded. So whatever claim China was actually making, everything was somewhere dashed by the Permanent Court of Arbitration. The arbitration determined that development and land reclamation had fundamentally changed the rates in contravention of any close commitments. China has, in fact, not just reiterated this, all these issues or this judgment, but what actually is, this PCA said is Permanent Court of Arbitration that China has somewhere inflicted irreparable harm to the maritime environment, in addition to the destroying evidence of the natural condition of features in the essence, that is South China Sea. The tribunal also found that China has violated the sovereign rights of the Philippines in its exclusive economic zone. Now, what is exclusive economic zone? So remember, economic exclusive zone is basically this zone of any country, maritime nation basically. It is the area which extends beyond the territorial sea by 1200 nautical miles. Okay, 1200 nautical miles. So how did this China has violated the sovereign rights of the Philippines? Number one is by interfering with Philippines fishing and petroleum exploration. Second, by constructing artificial islands. And third, failing to stop Chinese fishermen from fishing in the zone of exclusive economic zone of Philippines. Okay, so it added further that China had reduced the traditional fishing rights of Filipino fishermen, and that by physically obstructing Philippine vessels, Beijing had raised the serious risk of collision. Of course, if you are, let us say any country, let us say, opposing or restricting or somewhere physically obstructing vessels of another country, so of course this, somewhere paves the ground for serious risk of collision. Okay, at sea. Finally, it determined that China had no legal basis for asserting historic rights to resources located within the sea areas under the tribunal's jurisdiction. Fine. So this was a clear-cut, this judgment that whatever China is claiming is not actually founded on ground. Okay, so there is no historical rights, no legal basis for asserting historical rights at all. So all of the things were, made quite clear by the Permanent Court of Arbitration. So it is essential to remember that the tribunal did not rule that it was unlawful in principle for China to undertake construction activities on the disputed island that it occupies. But somewhere you see the loopholes in the judgment itself. Like one of the lacuna was, it is essential to remember that the tribunal did not rule that it was unlawful. So tribunal nowhere said that it was unlawful on the part of this. Did not know that it was unlawful in principle for China to undertake construction activities on the disputed island that it occupies. So nowhere it outrightly said that China cannot construct, let us say, artificial islands or something like that, any build up or construction activities on the disputed island that it actually occupied in the South China Sea, and that there is nothing in the decision which would make it unlawful for China to construct military installation on the island it occupies. So even this was the second major loophole or the lacuna of this judgment. So nothing is stopping China from constructing military installation on the island it occupies. So with the exception of mischief reef, but the tribunal emphasized. So even after these two important loopholes, the tribunal emphasized that. So what was being emphasized by tribunal? Emphasized that the dispute is driven by their fundamentally different interpretation of the separate rights under UN clause in the South China Sea, of course. So the whole issue was related to the interpretation of the rights mentioned in that UN clause with respect to South China Sea. So what should be done in response to a China that is assertive and disobeying international law? You have seen that China, when transgressing the territorial integrity and sovereignty, of course, for example, Doklam, and then, of course, further is in the Ladakh itself. So, what could be done? Okay, so way forward. A case for dialogue, of course. Through dialogue, only bigger issues can be sorted out. So the South China Sea is a crucial maritime gateway and junction for shipping between the Pacific and the Indian Oceans. Fine. Any confrontation in the South China Sea, because one of the world's most vital oceans in terms of geopolitics, economy, and strategy, will be a danger to regional and global security. So, first, direct confrontation will not be in favor of any country, because this is a major area of course, a shipping area. As free and stable maritime commons are crucial to global trade and economy, India and many other nations have an interest in safeguarding the water lanes that pass through the region. Of course, because of course our trade interest and maritime shipping interest is involved with respect to this area. Despite the fact that the PCA declared its decision, the reality on the ground has not altered, making it practically impossible to carry out the decision. By reiterating the need for a peaceful conflict resolution that fully respects legal and diplomatic channels. So, what should be the focus? Focus should be on peaceful conflict resolution that fully respects legal and diplomatic channels. So, focus should be on peaceful diplomatic negotiations. Okay? Conflict resolution. And abides by the ruling, India has sent a strong message that the region wants peace and respect for international law. So, of course, by siding with Philippines on this issue, India has given a strong message to the China that the whole of this region wants peace and respect for international laws, especially maritime laws here we're talking about. So, there is a realization that the South China Sea problem requires a political framework which can only be created through dialogue. Leaders of the association, leaders of the ASEAN, that is Association of Southeast Asian Nations, 10 major countries like Vietnam, Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines and all, should try to find a political solution through quick work diplomacy, as the potential for resolving this issue through legal method is very low. So the creation of political frameworks, the focus should be on diplomatic and political framework, and progress towards a legally binding code of conduct falls more on the shoulders of the ASEAN leaders. If the ASEAN nations want to convey a crucial political message to China, greater understanding is needed among themselves, means the 10 ASEAN members itself. So they need to come forward, take the responsibility, shoulder this responsibility of coming out with peaceful resolution of these whole issues. But first of all, because these 10 countries even has even having bilateral relations with China, fine. So even they need to, in first place, clear whatever conflicts or misunderstandings they are having with themselves, and then they can, as a united front, can take some steps against China or pursue China in order to take some peaceful or sit on the table for some peaceful resolution. Fine. So here emphasis is on peaceful resolution, conflict resolution, on diplomatic framework alongside that political framework, and of course this political framework will be led by whom? By the ASEANs. Okay. So this was in nutshell the whole this article, a very beautifully written article. But of course remember the role of ultimately India, how India can. So of course India always talks about peace and all. So of course India can also play a role in this South China Sea issues. Okay, so the next article is how the CPI basket conceals the inflation picture. So authors here mentioning about that how actually the current CPI basket is not up to mark, let us say, or not taking into account the changing scenarios, fine, or the evolving scenario, let us say, changing the standard of living, changing the basket of goods, fine. So that's why this is that the outdated or the this old structure, you can say, or the unconventional structure, which do not take into account the changing scenario. So of course somewhere this conceals the actual this inflation rate in the country or inflation picture. So of course you see the legends here. Vivek Debroy is the chairman of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister, and Aditya Sinha is the Additional Private Secretary, Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister. So both of them are members of, one is the chairman, the other person is a member of Prime Minister Advisory Council. Okay, so let us quickly what they are saying. So with a beautiful anecdote, they are writing, imagine entering an antique store and coming across an old wooden trunk. Your eyes wander to a dusty corner where an old radio sits beside a stack of audio cassettes. I hope, not all of you, but some of you will be aware of such things. This wooden trunk plus cassettes, audio cassettes, fine, and alongside that, old radio. So suddenly you are transported to a time when these items were cutting-edge technology. But if you compare them with today's technology, AI and all, artificial intelligence, robotics and all, you see the transformative change. So, a time when their presence in household was commonplace earlier, however today, these items are deemed obsolete. Of course, over the time these items deemed obsolete. What used to be precious or important item 50 or 10, 100 years before today. So of course today it seems to be obsolete with, of course, evolving technology especially. So apart from this, okay, so this nostalgic scene could well be a metaphor for our current process of tracking the consumer price index and subsequently calculating inflation. So they are basically taking this example as a metaphor for our current process of tracking the CPI and subsequently calculating inflation. They are saying that we continue to monitor a basket of goods that includes torches, radios, tape recorders, CDs, DVDs, audio, video cassettes and trunks, among some 300 other items. Although these have minimal weight in the overall CPI calculation, we are clinging on to the past, tracking items that no longer hold the same relevance in our consumption patterns. Of course, you see that how many of you are, we can ask ourselves that how many of you are aware or even demand or go for such things, for example, torches, radios, tape recorders, CDs, DVDs, audio, video, cassettes. How many? Excuse me. So these are the items which are, especially our generation, or these are the things of the past, we can say, which hardly finds much of the mentioning, let us say, or much of demand in the market. Okay, so these are some outdated items which are still there in our CPI basket. So evolving basket. So whenever we talk about inflation, CPI inflation, so CPI inflation or even WPI inflation, these two has the basket, where you find the number of goods, 300, 400, items, even more than that. So this needs to be reviewed and revised as well. taking into account the current scenarios. So evolving basket. CPI basket should not be viewed as an unchangeable artifact frozen in time. On the contrary, the real consumption basket of a common Indian is fluid and continually evolving, varying the shift in societal needs, preferences, and economic conditions. Of course, whatever consumption patterns we have, it keeps on changing with the change in the income, and of course the standard of living. There are many factors which cause this. So that's why the consumption basket of majority of the Indians or common Indian is not frozen but rather fluid and continually evolving. As time progresses, consumption pattern of individuals and households inevitably changes. Technological advancement introduces new products and services. It is not just these items which make the CPI flawed. In the current CPI, with the base year 2012, weights of the various groups are as follows. For example, the highest weight is for the food and beverages. You see that is 45.86%. Then after that, pan, tobacco and intoxicants 2.38%, clothing and footwear 6.53%, housing 10%, fuel and light 6.84%, and then miscellaneous items 28.32%. So these together makes 100% of the CPI baskets. The share of the respective this category you see. The weightage of the food in the CPI basket has decreased. So now focusing on the weightage of food in the overall CPI basket. So it has increased, you see, decreased, from 60.9, that is almost 61% in 1960 to 57% in 1982, and today it is somewhere around 46, not today, but 46.2% it was in 2001, but today it is 45.86%. Okay, this gradual decline indicates that as the economy grows, the proportion of income. So in economics, we have Engel's law, which is just that as the economy grows, the proportion of income you spend on food and beverages goes on declining. There is a negative or inverse relation between growth in income or growth of the economy and your consumption pattern. Right? With respect to especially the food, remember. So of course, as the economy grows or your income grows, the expenditure on food decreases or declines. This is a common trend known as Engel's law in economics, which suggests that as income rises, the proportion of income spent on food falls, even if the absolute expenditure on food rises. Right? So even if absolute expenditure is rising on the food, you see the relative expenditure or the proportion of income that you are spending on food falls with rising income. Over-reliance on food inflation today distinguishes Indian inflation from many other developed countries where the food weight is much smaller. So they are saying, because even if you see today the highest share of in the food basket, overall the CPI basket is of the food and beverages, that is 45.86%, almost half. Fine, but this is not the case with respect to the developed countries. So this shift implies that as people's income rises, they tend to allocate a larger proportion of their spending towards non-food items such as housing, education, healthcare, personal care, entertainment, and digital services such as the internet. This reflects general improvement in living standards and a broadening of consumer demands. Further, the startling high weight of 9.67 assigned to cereals in the current CPI is undoubtedly excessive and casts a stark light on the two critical issues. So they are saying that further the next group, that is 9.6% overall share of the cereals in the overall CPI basket, is again an excessive one and casts a stark light on the two critical issues. Then what are the two critical issues they are underlining? The first is, as nations undergo economic advancement and societal progress, a typical trajectory involves diversifying food intake and embracing a broader range of nutrient-rich options beyond cereals. So of course, you see that when your income is rising, the standard of living rising, with the society progresses, and when there is economic advancement, so you see more of intake of nutrient-rich options moving beyond just simple cereals. Another is this paradigm shift in dietary habits would have undoubtedly manifested over the past decade, diluting the relative expenditure on cereals. Second critical issue is the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana, which covers around 80 crores of this population of 80 crores, not percent, 80 crore out of all of course, 4.4 lakh crores, of course. So 80 crores covers almost this 80 crores. So the Pradhan Mantri Curricular Yojana, which was actually launched during pandemic, has substantially reduced cereal expenditure for large segments of the population. It has likely led to modifying consumption patterns and further reducing the relative expenditure on cereals. So there are other examples as well. Ashok Gulati, the noted agricultural economist, you can say, or economist, of course, has written about how tomatoes, onions and potatoes have considerably higher impact on inflation. So you can put this in your GS3 somewhere, right? It answers to inflation now. It should be lower, however, and he is saying the currently soaring tomato prices will disproportionately affect the CPI as well. We have seen in the first front page of the article where you see the CPI rising to 4.81% from the May 4.31%, then inflation rising by around 0.5%, and the major factors behind this increase or rise in prices is your rise in inflation is basically your cereals, pulses and tomatoes, of course. So that's why you see here even the soaring tomato prices will disproportionately affect the overall CPI, inflation. So consumption expenditure. While it is essential to comprehend the evolution of consumption patterns with growing economic prosperity, the challenge lies in effectively reflecting these changes. Of course, the challenge lies in the data. In our inflation matrix without access up to. So the challenge lies in access your inflation matrix without access to up-to-date consumption expenditure data. Weights for CPI can only undergo significant shift after we have data from Household Consumption Expenditure Survey (CES) data. So currently, the MOSPI, the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, which basically undertakes this survey, is in the midst of the CES Consumer Expenditure Survey, with the first round slated to be concluded in the July 2023, this month only, and the second round a year later in July 2024. So the ministry will require an additional 3 to 6 months to process the collected electronic data. However, one should perturb this concerned anxiety with such long processing times in this digital age. Nevertheless, even when the CS results are finally published by, let us say, December 2024, the creation of new CPI mass based on this fresh data will consume several more months. So even if MOSPI releases data by December or publishes CS data by December 2024, of course it will take more months in order to overall change the CPI basket or the items in the CPI basket. Therefore, we find ourselves in a predicament. We will rely on archaic parameters such as DVD players and trunks for at least the next 2 years to gauge our inflation. This isn't merely a theoretical challenge, it's a question of how accurately we are measuring the cost of living and economic well-being. So of course, this is not just issue about inflation in the country, but it's also about issues about how we are going to how accurately we are actually measuring the cost of living in the country and economic well-being alongside the poverty line as well. In a rapidly evolving digital economy, our data collection and inflation estimation methods must adapt and evolve in tandem to ensure they accurately reflect the realities of modern day consumption and living. Of course, with changing scenarios, changing this or evolving digital economy, the data of course should should be generated more let us say the speed and scale, of course. So our data collection and inflation estimation, these two things or the methods must adapt and evolve in tandem. Fine. So the absence of what would be the other consequences of the absence of this CES consumption expenditure survey data has spawned a slew of issues. We are unable to determine the population under the poverty line accurately, and our ability to track inflation effectively has been severely undermined. Our tools for understanding and managing our economic reality are grossly inadequate. Consequently, it's an absolute necessity for MOSPI to address these gaps promptly. So this is the issue with MOSPI, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, to address these problems related to the CES data and all, and the time is taking for publishing the data. Additionally, efficient data processing should be non-negotiable priority. Lastly, for MOSFET to sit indefinitely on the findings of the different surveys is an abdication of the responsibility that India can ill afford. So if MOSFET is, if you see the previous year's data was published long back. So of course, if MOSFET is sitting for indefinite times on the findings of different surveys, it is something like abdication of responsibility. कहीं ना कहीं आपकी जिम्मेवारी से भाग रहे हो, ठीक है? So which of course India can ill afford, fine? Because data is must. Data required. You need data for coming up with, let us say, good policy reforms, good policies, good plans, fine? So without data, you cannot make good policies as well, fine? Data is like the backbone for any policy making and policies. Because this provides you a direction that where actually we need to focus on. Okay, the next is related to the National Research Foundation. Okay, our focus is on enhancing our overall research and development budget, spending of our GDP, of course, from currently 0.7% to somewhere around 2% by 2030, which still will be much lower than our peers or our competitors, fine, for the major countries. So how is the body going to be funded? Is the funding too less when compared to the nation's GDP? How is NRF planning to make research and development easier? Okay. So the story so far. The Union Cabinet has approved the introduction of the National Research Foundation Bill in Parliament, placing once again the debate on science and technology funding in the spotlight. So what is the NRF first? Setting up the NRF was one of the key recommendations of the National Education Policy. The NRF intends to act as coordinating agency between researchers, various government bodies and industry, thus bringing industry into the mainstream of research. So you see the focus of, as the name says, National Research Foundation. So for the core focus or the core objective would be, somewhere enhancing not just the spending of, on the R&D, but also integrating the different, let us say, this domains or different fields, like for example science, humanities and all, and alongside that coordinating with the various agencies, along with, for example, with the researchers, government bodies, industry, therefore bringing overall industry to the mainstream of research. In addition to providing research grants to individuals, the NRF plans to seed, grow and facilitate research in India's universities, especially state universities, by funding research infrastructure and researchers. It's a very good initiative, you can say. How it manifests, that will be more important. So how will it be funded now? So what is the funding provision for this NRF? So it will operate with a budget of 50,000 crores for 5 years, of which 28%, that is 40,000 crore, will be the government share, and the remaining 72% will come from the private sector. So it is an equity-based, funding or share-based funding, where central government, of course, going to contribute 28% of this total 50,000 crores amount, and the rest 72% will be coming from the private sector. That's why we are involving here, or emphasizing on bringing the industry sector in the picture, right? Okay, the NRF draft proposes the government share to increase eventually to 20,000 crore per year out of the government share. 4,000 crore will be used from the existing science and engineering research board's budget, which will be subsumed under the NRF. So this board is going to be subsumed under NRF, remember? Therefore, the government has earmarked an additional 10,000 crore over the next 5 years for the NRF. However, this increase in the nation's gross domestic expenditure on the research and development GERD seems too meager, less than 2% of the GERD, especially if one compares the GDP and the comparative spending in other big economies such as the US and China. As per the last available statistics, 2017-18 की data के बारे में बात करें, so India GERD, that is gross, GERD is your gross domestic expenditure on research and development. So according to the 2017-18 data, India GERD figure 1,30,825 crores, while India GDP was 7.6 and 5.1 times smaller than that of the China, US and China, of course. smaller than that of the US and China respectively. India's GDP was nearly 24 times less than both these countries. So you see, though our GDP is respectively 7.6 and 5.1 times, smaller than that of the US and China respectively. But if we talk about our spending, that is GRD, that is gross domestic, expenditure on research and development, that is in comparison to the two countries 24 times smaller or lower than or lesser than these two countries you see. So see, GDP is not even 8 times smaller than US, but our spending on research and development is 24 times lesser. It means more than 3 times. Okay. So, and in the last 5 years, that gap has further widened. How can the AI facilitate the use of good science? So, first, the time between applying for a research grant and receiving the money must be minimal, of course, preferably within 6 months. Amounts should be sanctioned. Although the NIF draft mentions that the peer review process will be completed within 6 months, releasing funds may take time, pending financial clearances. Second issue, all the paperwork must be digitally processed without sending stacks of papers in hard copies to the NIF because it takes time. Third, all finance-related queries, paperwork, approval, and acceptance need to be between the NIF and the finance departments of the university and research institutions, keeping the scientists free to focus on research. Of course, the people involved in research should not be, burdened with all these clearance mechanism and all, but rather this communication should be between the respective finance department of the universities and the National Research Foundation, leaving the researchers or the scientists to focus on their respective domain, that is of research. Fine? So they should not be concerned more about the fundings. Fourth is that the NRF needs explicit spending guidelines away from the general financial rules and the government e-marketplace usage. So fourth point, stressing on that the NRF needs explicit spending guidelines away from the GFR, that is general financial rules, and of course the next is government's e-marketplace usage. So of course we need to have explicit spending guidelines for the NRF from the government side. Scientific research needs independent guidelines for spending money, of course. This is a very good line, which provides flexibility while making scientists accountable. And finally, the fifth and last point, the release of money needs to be timely. Although the NRF draft mentions timely disbursal of funds, a mechanism needs to be in place to facilitate and implement this. Fine. While the participation of the private industry in the NRF is an important and welcome step, it is unclear how the government will raise 36,000 crore from the industry. Although the NRF describes a legislative route to facilitate this, a more detailed plan and establishing mechanism akin to escrow accounts will be released over the scientific. So the whole issue is about that how the government is actually going to, mobilize 36,000 crore from this your private sector or the industry. Fine. So this will be a big challenge for the government. So of course, NRF mentions and describes legislative route as well. For example, government can come up with such a legislations where it will be mandatory. Like for example, we have CSR, corporate social responsibility, where certainly 3 to 4% of their net, this earning need to be, of course, contributed towards CSR. So such kind of mechanism, of course, government can always come up, but it should be, it should be with the consonance of this private sector taking into account this private sector development industry as well. So what's next? The proposed NRF is largely modeled after the National Science Foundation of the US. Okay. So somewhere this is based on the National Science Foundation of the US. It borrows some of the best practices from the Germany, UK, Swiss, Switzerland, Norwegian, South Korean and Singapore science agencies. Even if the NRF draft discusses critical thinking, creativity and bringing innovation to the forefront, it is unclear how the NRF will transparently seed, fund and coordinate research across institutions. So this is quite unclear even now. The success of the NRF will lie in how the government sets rules and implements the same, different from what already exists. Right? So you see, of course, the whole outcome of the game depends on how well you set the rules and implement the same. Fine? Just setting the rules is not enough, but how actually you are implementing the same on ground. Okay? So this will make a difference because different how this analysis is going to be different from already existing bodies or agencies. This will be best to a greater extent on this guidelines and implementation. Okay. So moving to the next pages. Again, the important article resource. Okay, next we will be focusing on some miscellaneous facts from a preliminary exam point of view. So what in UNHRC report, India stands against discretion of Quran. See. Okay, so this is a United Nations Human Rights Commission, of course. India stands against discretion of Quran. Indian legislature voted in favor of a draft resolution tabled in the United Nations Human Rights Council that condemns and strongly rejects recent public and premeditated acts of discretion of Quran. Fine. So of course this is a very good step. So we are giving a message that of course India is siding with the issues which are of not just important but morally right as well. Fine. We should not discredit any of the scriptures, be it of any religion. Fine. Geneva-based 47-member UN Human Rights Council adopted the draft resolution countering religious hatred constituting incitement of discrimination, hostility, or violence. With 28 members, of course, how many voted? That's not important. India voted in favor of the resolution that condemns and strongly rejects the recent public and premeditated, already same of the Holy Quran and underscores the need for holding the perpetrators of these acts of religious hatred to account in line with the obligation of states arising from international human rights law. So we have voted in favor alongside the resolution voting in favor Bangladesh, China, Cuba, Malaysia, Maldives, Pakistan, Qatar, and UAE. Fine. So all of these countries have voted in favor. But see, this draft resolution was brought by Pakistan on behalf of the states members of the United Nations that are members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation as well as Palestine. So you see who has brought this, and the nations which voted against. Nations voting against the resolution included Belgium, Finland, France, Germany, UK, and US as well. So they have voted against. Okay. China pitched 4 tents in buffer zone in Ladakh, Chushu Council. Okay. So this is of course going on from the Chinese side. Leading GST PMLA is the road to tax terrorism. Okay. Okay. Okay, next again politics. Center to buy tomatoes from south and west to sell in northern cities. Already I have told you. Fine. And you see in the north the highest Batinda in Punjab records the highest price of 203 per kg tomato rate. Fine. So north basically Delhi NCR region by tomorrow. And I have already mentioned the south and western states, this is Andhra, Karnataka and Maharashtra, from where the center is going to procure and therefore disburse the same at discounted prices in the Delhi NCR region by tomorrow, means of course today. Okay, and this is about then what NABARD is the spine of rural India, says our Home Minister. Fine. So therefore NABARD becomes important. This is how the context becomes important. Fine, for the UPSC. And you see, he said that NABARD has refinanced 20 lakh crore in the rural economy with a growth rate of 14% in the last 42 years. Clearly that a nation with 65% rural population cannot prosper without NABARD. Fine. So this underlines this comment underlines. Fine. Underlines the importance of NABARD. Apart from that, President has maintained diversity and tolerance. India is a multicultural and multi-religious society, celebrates unity and diversity, and its over 200 million Muslims make the country the second largest population of the community in the world, President said on Wednesday. Okay, and this was said when she was welcoming Muslims World League Secretary General Muhammad bin Abdul Karim Al-Sisar Al-Isa. Okay, further, our President India appreciates the role of the Muslim World League in promoting tolerant values, moderation of consciousness, and interfaith dialogue. She added that both India and Saudi Arabia were calling for zero tolerance against terrorism You see, on the one side we are welcoming the president in a Muslim World League. On the other side, we are favoring we are voting in favor of against the discussion of Quran. So of course, both of these are the good states, which somewhere evidence that we are of course concerned about the Muslim Islamic nations and people as well. Okay. Supreme Court gets 2 new judges. You see, so Telangana Chief Justice Ujjwal Bhuyan and Kerala Chief Justice S. Narayan Bhatti as Supreme Court judges. Okay, they are appointed through the collegium system. Collegium constitutes 5 judges, 1 CJI plus 4 senior most judges in the Supreme Court. Fine. And now the 2 new appointments, increasing the judicial strength of the court to 33, leaving only 1 vacancy. So the total number of strength in Supreme Court is 1 plus 33, remember, earlier it was 30, then increased by government in recent times by 10%, so it became 30 plus 3 of course, 33, and 1 is of course CJ, so total number is 34. Currently it is, after these 2 appointments, stands at 33, means still 1 vacancy is there. Okay. Okay. Further, moving to the international pages, despite conservative backlash, EU Parliament backs that out in bill. Okay. Zelensky persists with bid for Ukraine's NATO entry. Okay. So of course you see, but NATO has, I have already mentioned, not given a defined timeline that when Ukraine will be the part of this group. So IIP index of industrial production rises by somewhere around 5.2%, led by the infrastructure growth. Mining and manufacturing output increase at a swifter rate of 6.4%, 5.7% respectively, in May with the latter powered by consumer durables snapping 5 months decline. NSO data shows 12 of 23 manufacturing subsectors reported contractions. So this is not a good figure. Almost half of them showed contraction. Undergirding industrial output, May's IIP increase was spurred by 40% expansion in infrastructure and construction goods output. This is a bilateral statistical organization. NSO data capital goods production growth accelerated to 8.2% from earlier 6.2%. Apparel makers and furniture producers reported the steepest decline in output by 21% and 20.5% respectively. This is the steepest decline in the apparel and furniture two sectors. Pharma output and motor vehicles production, on the other hand, saw sharp upticks of 20.9% and 30.4% respectively. So you see, out of the 23 manufacturing subsectors, 12 noted contractions. Among them are the biggest contractions apparel market and furniture. Okay. US CPI inflation slowed to 3% in June. R stands 4.8%. Okay. And Gambia mandates free shipment testing for Indian pharma because lots of issues being, deaths and all happening worldwide from the Indian exported as a syrup, cough syrup and all. So that's why the country is making it mandatory for pre-testing, pre-shipment testing. Fine. So finally we have that on the sports page. So that's it from my side for the day. Fine. We have covered all the important editorials. Alongside that, we have covered the miscellaneous facts figures as well. Okay. So if you have any query, anything, any problem, you can put the same in the comment section. Fine. Until then, take care, keep revising, and stay tuned for tomorrow's Hindu Live. Thank you.